You've got to be part of a gang, haven't you? Eh? You've got to be a model, this or that. I mean, haven't you got a mind of your own? I'll tell you what's wrong with you. You're schizophrenic, that's what you are.
What's that then, eh?
What's that? I'll tell you what that is. It's somebody like you who doesn't know whether his mind's over here or over there. Bloody split personality.
In 1960s Great Britain, before there was the summer of love, there was the summer of sex. Drugs, violence, immaculate tailoring and sweet soul music. The cult film classic Quadrophenia brings the summer of 1964 vividly to life. This was the time when a brand new youth movement came roaring over the horizon. They were the mods, and Quadrophenia is their movie.
You take it or leave it, me son. Take it or leave it.
Based on a rock opera by seminal mod band The Who, Quadrophenia was shot over 5 weeks in 1978. It stars a gang of teenage actors who went on to become household names in British TV, film and music, including Phil Daniels, Ray Winston, Leslie Ash, Sting and Toyah. Produced by The Who, Roy Baird and manager Bill Curbishley, the film was written and directed by first-time director Franc Roddam, better known at the time for his documentary and TV work. To achieve the film's naturalistic style, Roddam insisted on getting his cast of unknowns to hang out together, learning to dance, handle their scooters and fight like proper mods. The feeling that this was a real gang is one of the reasons Quadrophenia is considered one of the great youth culture movies.
I am one of the faces.
All teenage life is here, in its fast-living, sharp-dressing, pill-popping, heartbreaking glory. Now, for the first time ever, join Franc Roddam and the key actors on a road journey down memory lane.
We were living it.
It was the movie to be in.
It was a big kind of bubble of energy.
I can't tell that story.
A lot of fun. And nobody got killed, by the way.
The who, the what, the why, and a way of life behind the making of Quadrophenia.
Pete Townsend wrote the album for Quadrophenia when he heard about a mod who had committed suicide off Beachy Head. And Beachy Head are the beautiful white cliffs. When you first come to England from France, you see these beautiful white cliffs. It represents England. And lo and behold, this young man had thrown himself off it. And there were quite a lot of suicides off this beautiful cliff. And he wrote an album about it, about teenage angst.
Great thing about The Who was they were the only band of the 60s who really addressed full-on the whole question of youthful identity and the violence that is inherent in a lot of youthful protest and so on.
And what's this about some rice kicking your head in? Hold it, Daddy, gonna run at the blast. Come on! Come here! Stay there, right? What are we going to do? We're going to fucking kill them!
They wrote great youth anthems. The Stones and the Beatles didn't really do anthems. They did big, catchy sing-along songs, but no one wrote a song like My Generation, or Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere, or Substitute, all of which key in different ways to very important sort of impulses in particularly young men.
The stories in each of the tracks in Quadrophenia album by Pete Townsend indicate enough information for me to realize that he was dealing with archetypical situations which I knew to be true, whether getting the girl, not getting the girl, wanting drugs, the effect of drugs, wanting to fight, being a loser, being a winner, all those archetypal things which deal with teenage angst. I could see that the album was like a skeleton for that.
Quadrophenia was a slightly sort of overblown concept on the part of Pete Townsend, describing someone who had a four-way split personality. And the film really sort of takes up that idea without actually labouring the point. So it's very faithful to that, but it fleshes it out with a lot of very well-observed sort of social realism from the early 1960s.
What happened in the early 60s, there was a social revolution in England. And the working class started to break out. Suddenly what really happened is the working class had more money. This blue-collar society was heading to becoming lower middle class. And it meant that the youth had money in their pockets to spend.
I've just been down to play me suit off.
Yeah, what's it like?
Handsome. 3 buttons, side vents, 16-inch bottoms.
So what happened was you had youth separating itself from the family, big time. They were no longer slaves to their parents. They suddenly had their own rooms, they had their own music, they had their own clothes, they had their own transportation with the scooter. And it was a social revolution. And one of the main group that started in that social revolution was the mod group.
What the mods were was relatively underprivileged working class blokes saying, look, you know, I mean something. I'm a stylish person. I'm going to make myself into something.
The thing about being a kid in the 60s, you know, there were jobs and, you know, you could earn a few bob and all that, but, you know, a lot of those kids, they were factory fodder. You know, nothing much was expected of them.
Take that to Mr. Phelps.
Mr. Phelps, eh?
But they'd go down to Brighton, you know, dressed in their finery, and they were kings for a weekend. And it was fantastic.
I felt that the mod movement was not a revolutionary movement, it was a rebellious movement. And they were proud of being workers, they wanted to go to work, they didn't want to change the social order that much. They didn't want to get out of prison, they just wanted the top bunk.
Well, I don't want to be the same as everybody else. That's why I'm a mod, see? I mean, you got to be somebody, ain't you? Or you might as well jump in the sea and drown.
The other part of the social revolution was that there'd be a social sexual revolution, because the pill had happened, birth control. So the first time young people could have sex, really, without the fear of pregnancy or the embarrassment of having to go and buy condoms.
Daddy! What? What are you doing?
What do you think I'm doing?
Oh, yeah, where have I seen that face before?
Are you all right?
Yeah, get in there, my son.
So suddenly, you had young guys and young girls hanging out together, definitely having sex, definitely safe sex.
The times weren't the only thing moving on. So was Pete Townshend's original musical concept.
I think it's a very different thing. The concept of the album and the film are two very different ideas. Pete took Quadrophenia on tour, and he took Phil Daniels with him when they did it, when was it, 97, 98 or something. And it's very obvious it's a very different piece of work than the film. The film is of its own, I think.
Only love and make it rain like the sweat of lovers laying in the fields.
Just about all of Townshend's original vision is in the film, plus a lot more besides. I mean, the film adds a lot of backstory in terms of introducing more characters, a whole layer of social setup at the beginning, and exploring the homes and the backgrounds in London.
Pete Townshend is an incredible social chronicler and, you know, an incredible rock musician and storyteller. When I first met with him at the studios at Wembley, he brought in some tapes with him, and the tapes were orchestrated versions of Quadrophenia. Now, Quadrophenia is a rock album, and he brought strings version in. And I imagined that he probably thought I was going to do something similar to what Ken Russell had done it with Tommy, which is make it an opera. And I felt it was very important not to follow in Ken Russell's footsteps, because we wanted the film to be very different, but I also felt that this story was much more real. It was much more about working class culture, it was much more about street, it was much more about rock and roll. So I wanted to do it in a sort of much more realistic approach, naturalistic if you like. So I had to say to Pete on our very first meeting, and it was a difficult moment, I had to say to Pete, I don't want to do it with this music, I don't want to do it with strings. And I said, it's got to be rock and roll, it's got to be street.
He-Man drag in a glittering ballroom, gravely outrageous in my high-heeled shoes, tightly undone, know what they're showing, sadly ecstatic.
And then I said, and if you're going to deal in some kind of truth for that period, we can't just have your music. We have to have music that they're also listening to. Your music will be the crowning glory of it, but I have to have other tracks as well. And I was very straightforward and very clear about it, and he was fantastic. He immediately took the tapes and put them back in his pocket, and he said, look, I did the album, you're going to make this film, do it in your own way.
One of the most memorable concerts I ever went to was The Who at the Lyceum in 1973, or possibly early 1974. It was them performing Quadrophenia, which was a huge undertaking from their part, because this was in the days before, you know, laptop computers and sequencers and programs. Townsend had to do it all himself.
There is a fantastic dynamic between Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey, which you see on stage. They're very, very different people. And I tried to put some of that dynamic into the film, because when you see them on stage and you see them, they're like tussling and arm wrestling with each other, musically, emotionally, and psychically, and you see this thing, and it creates, and you think, Roger's trying to sing more and more, and Peter won't let him off the hook. Peter's always like going at him, playing one more chord, one more round.
It looked actually slightly more than the four-man band, who were, you know, essentially a very raucous and high-energy rock band. They seemed to be slightly out of their depth in that regard, but it was extremely impressive to see what they were trying to do here, and it was almost a relief that somebody had the foresight to actually put all that into a film, where some of the ideas which he tried to invest in this double album could actually be given a bit of space to breathe.
Fuck off! Fuck off! Why don't you get off the pussy?
The Who, in their different ways, did encapsulate something of the mod about them. Daltrey had that slightly wild, and Moon also had that slightly wild, maverick energy and anger to them.
With so much energy put into looking the part, clothes were always going to be massively important.
Roger was also great, but he was into the style of the piece, and he wanted to make sure that we got the style right. And, you know, it's always good to have somebody like pushing you on style, but he wanted to make sure. He was saying we all wore white jeans, and he had to make. And when we did the shots, he would say there's not enough people in white jeans, in white chinos or whatever. And I remember we had to get photographic evidence to prove that the ratio of chinos to denim, or that we were in the right field.
Being mods was quite good fun. Just quite a smart, good look that, you know, had happened in 1964. And we had lots of the original clothes and stuff, so it was really nice to put it on.
The makeup people and the designers had a really good time with me because I was of the same physical build as women were in the 60s. I was slightly rounded, slightly chubby. You had none of this culture of thin women. Thin women would have been frowned on. You know, Twiggy was a phenomenon because women in the 60s were round and quite robust, and I physically fitted the bill. And I learnt later that Roger Daltrey said that I was the spitting image of his sister, and he thought that my image was right on the ball, and he confided in me that he would have liked Leslie Ash's role to look a bit more like that, but it would have taken all that attractiveness away from her because it was almost old-fashioned, you know, at the time that we made the film. It had a sense of being old-fashioned. You couldn't sell the sexuality of Leslie's role if she had the bouffant and everything.
It's quite funny. At the time, I saw Frank as this enormous, physically imposing man, which of course he's not at all. But he had this force of personality that he got what he wanted and he got things done.
Frank was very fatherly to all of us and always had an ear. If we needed to say something or we wanted to discuss something, Frank was there for it. And yet he did have a big presence, he had a big charisma, and he was in control. And many times, in many situations, he was in control of a monster because he had to direct these huge dance scenes, you know, in the club. I mean, that was a big club. We actually shot that in Southgate in London, and it was a massive place with tons of extras again. So he was always having to be in control of a lot of people wanting a lot of attention and a lot of young actors who, you know, wanted to be listened to. And he did it, you know, he controlled it really well. He was a very good master of a very big ship.
He wasn't very pushy, he wasn't dictatorial, he was very easy with young people. When you're directing 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and you're letting them have their heads, they're going to go mad, aren't they?